all generations, forever and ever. Amen. That's his summary. That's his conclusion of the first 3 chapters. So now in chapter 4, when Paul says to live a life worthy of the calling, he's talking about the calling he's just talked about. Let's dig into that just a little bit more. Did you pick up on what the 2 words were? The 2 words that show up over and over again are power and love. Check this out. I'm going to read it one more time. For this reason, Paul says, I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ. That's the key part right there. Paul says, I pray that you would be rooted in love so you would have power to understand Christ's love. I pray that God, in his power, would strengthen you so that you could be rooted in love to have more power to understand Christ's love. Keep going. Christ's love, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. What an incredible promise this is to people. But here's the calling. See, what's really going on here is Paul is saying there is a Father in heaven who has adopted us all to be a part of a family that is infused with power and love. Infused with God's power as we live in God's love. Infused with God's power as we live in God's love. So what is the calling? The calling is to live in God's love, to experience his power. So now when we get to chapter 4, we find this at work. He says, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you've received. And how do we live in love? And how do we express God's power? Verse 2, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Love. Because of his power and the calling he's given to us, we can live in love. Now see, here's the thing. You and I get to that place where we feel like we don't have any more love to give. We feel like all the love is gone, and the only thing that's left is to either get out the truth in whatever way it comes out of our face, or to just walk away because the love is gone. That's the way we feel. I remember I had a kind of an epiphany when I was younger. I was sitting in the back seat of my mom's car. I had just come back from college. I'd been away from my hometown in college for the year, semester, 2 semesters of college. And then I'd come back for the summer. And when I got back to the town, I noticed the roads were wider and there was more traffic. Everything seemed to be more built up, even in just that 1 year. And my mom said, okay, let's go to the mall. She wanted to buy me some things because when I came back from college, she always wanted to buy me things. And I was willing to let her do that. You know, it's love. She's showing me her love. So anyway, we're going to the mall and I'm sitting in the back seat. My sister's in the passenger seat. My mom's driving. We're going down the road. And I remember watching her get intensely frustrated with all the traffic around her. She would get into this lane, and then there'd be some idiot slowpoke in front of her in that lane, so then she'd get into this lane, and that was no better. Now she's behind the guy in front of her, and the idiot slowpoke has gone on forward, so she'd change back to that lane. And we're going back. There were 3 lanes, and she was going back and forth between all the lanes, and it was clear she was frustrated, and she was irritated, and she's talking out loud about how all the drivers around her are so dumb. And my sister is just encouraging this, and she's all supporting it, and they're both arguing about this, and they're yelling at the drivers, and I'm thinking, in the back seat, I had a very interesting perspective. I just leaned back. I was like, doesn't matter to me. When we get there, we get there. If we get to the mall 1 minute earlier, it's not going to make much of a difference. If we get to the mall 5 minutes later, I'm still going to be at the mall. My mom's still going to buy me something. Whatever. I'm cool. So I was just there in the back seat, and this weird epiphany happened at this moment, where I thought to myself, what if I were driving? I'm in the same car, same environment, same circumstances. In the back seat, I feel peace. In the front seat, would I feel the same peace? If I was driving, would I feel the same peace? And this is my epiphany. Yes, I can. If I can feel peace in one situation, then I can claim the same power for the same peace in any other situation. And here's the blank I want you to jot down. God's power. If God's power gives me peace and humility and strength in one area of my life, in any individual area of my life, then I can claim that same power in every area of my life. If God's power can give me peace and humility and patience in any area, I can claim the same things in every area of my life. So here's the thing. It says in Ephesians 3 that God is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. I can imagine being peaceful in a situation, and God can do even more. So no matter if the situation is 10 times worse, God can make me peaceful even in that situation. And I can have love even in that. This is fascinating to me because this is directly going against all that we think about when it comes to conflict. Because we think, I hit the wall, I'm backed into a corner, and the fight or flight response comes in. And God says, no. You have a power that's way bigger than all that. If you were the uninvolved bystander 5 yards away watching these two people fight, would you be emotionally involved? Probably not. So can you be that person right here face to face and also have peace? As a matter of fact, you can. And it kind of begins with this attitude that says, God's power, my effort. God's power comes into my effort and flows out. Let's keep reading. Verse 3. Paul says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. You know exactly what this is talking about. Anytime you're in conflict, doesn't it just consume you? You're in a conflict relationship and you go to bed the night before thinking about that conflict and thinking about the things that you could have said, that you didn't say, the things you wanted to say, the things that should have been said, the things that you did say that you wish you didn't say, and then you wake up in the morning and you dread opening your email because the person is going to have sent you a letter possibly, and you open that email and the emotions start roiling in you, and you read the email, and you take everything that other person says wrong because you're already upset about it. But it consumes you. And then you spend an hour sitting there at your computer writing out the most eloquent response that you've ever written out to any email in the history of the world. And then you pause, and you say, well, maybe I shouldn't send this. And you walk away, and you get a cup of coffee, and you come back 5 minutes later, and you realize there are 10 more things that you could say that you didn't say, so you add them to the email. Now the email is longer. You've already spent an hour and a half on it, and you say, you know what? It's really smart to not send this. Or maybe you've got that Gmail, the Google Gmail feature that says double check or something, where you hit send and then it waits an hour before it actually sends it so that you can then go back in there and cancel it if you come to your senses. But you know that you can do this, and so you step away for an hour and you think about it for a whole hour, but then you come back and you read it again, you say, I just can't send this, and you delete the whole thing, change it to 4 sentences, and then you send that one out. And you've wasted half your day. Make every effort at that conflict. And Paul says, make every effort for peace. Make every effort for unity. Make every effort. It's that important. Not just an hour here or a day there. Every moment of our days needs to be focused on how can I be unified with the people around me. Keep going. He says, make every effort. Then he says in verse 4, there's one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who's over all and through all and in all. You know what Paul is saying there? He's saying God is one. Listen, everything that God touches, everything that God's about, it's all one. This goes way back into the ancient Old Testament times where in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses says to the people of Israel, the thing that you're supposed to speak, the thing that you're supposed to say as your number one prayer, as your number one identity of who God is, goes like this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Everything God touches is one. He comes up with one Savior. He comes up with one plan of salvation. He comes up with one world he creates. He comes up with one heaven. He comes up with one family. And we don't have the right to say, you be in your family and I'll be in my family. Now, we live in a society that has a whole bunch of different churches, and when it's done poorly, it's because we've divided from each other. When it's done well, it's similar to what Paul and Barnabas did, where Paul and Barnabas split up from each other because Barnabas wanted to reach out to his cousin Mark, and Paul felt God was calling him to reach out to the unchurched people who'd never heard the message of Jesus before. And both of them were right. Mark ends up becoming one of the greatest guys in the New Testament because he writes the book of Mark, the first gospel ever to be written down. And if it weren't for Barnabas' work in Mark's life, that might never have happened. But if it weren't for Paul's work in the unevangelized world, the rest of the New Testament never would have happened. And so we've got both of those guys who made the right decision to split up because they were doing it for a mission purpose because God was calling them to something. But if you asked Paul, what do you think about Barnabas? He would say, I love that guy. And if you asked Barnabas what he thought about Paul, he'd say, I love that guy. And you know what? Later on in Paul's career, he writes a letter where he says, tell Mark to come to me because he's been a great help and a big encouragement. Paul loves that guy. See, even if we might split up for a time for different purposes or different missions or different goals, we're still one. Because God, whatever he touches, is one. So here's the application for you and other Christians. If you're with another Christian, you have no excuse but to resolve that conflict. None. If there's another Christian and you guys are in conflict with each other, it must be resolved so that you can say we're part of the same family, on the same team, for the same mission. Have to do that. Because otherwise, you're trying to split up the oneness of God, which is just messed up. Don't do it. But if you're with a non-Christian, how do you apply that? Well, notice what he said here. He said, there's one God and Father of all, who's over all, and through all, and in all. So even when you're with a non-Christian, you don't get off so easily. You still need to deal with that conflict. So based on the two passages we've looked at so far, we come to these conclusions. Number one, I have to deal with conflict. And number two, I'm always able to be gracious. Because of God's power in me, I can always be gracious. And because of who God is, I have to deal with conflict. Okay, so you know what that means? That means that silence and violence are both wrong. I can never be silent because I need to deal with conflict. I can't hide stuff from you because I need to deal with it. I can't just let things slide because I need to deal with it. But at the same time, I can't be violent because God is giving me the power. I can be gracious at any moment in time.